we reached Hebrews 11:6, and I said that is a key to help us understand all of the rest of the Bible.
ubushize twahoze tuganira urwandiko rw'Abaheburayo igice cya 11 n'umurongo wa 6 za kubabwira yuko igice cya 6 ari urufunguzo rwo guhesha gusobanukirwa uru rwandiko rw'Abaheburayo.
This is a key that unlocks the door for my house. Hebrews 11:6 is a key that unlocks the Old Testament.
No kuvuga ngo ruru rufunguzo mberese nzakinguza icyumba cy'iwacu. No kuvuga ngo Abaheburayo igice cya 11 n'umurongo wa 6 ni urufunguzo rufungura isezerano rya kera.
Anybody remember what Hebrews 11:6 says?
Haruzi uko Abaheburayo bavuga igice cya 11 n'umurongo wa 6
from your memory?
Uko abantu bashoboye. It is impossible to please God without faith. But the one who comes to God, he must believe.
Two things. He must believe that he is, that he's real, that he's there. And most translations say that he is a rewarder of those who seek him. Okay, but the word reward in religion usually means if I do something good, then I get something. It does not mean that.
Niyigororera abayishaka nuko mu idini ho bazabafata kugororerwa bakabifata nk'ibihembo ko ari akazi wakoze ugahabwa umushahara cyangwa ukishurwa.
So what it means is you have to believe that God is real, and you have to believe that if you accept him by faith, you will get something. He will give you something.
Ugomba kwizera Imana kuriho. Kandi uko kwizera kuriho ukizera kuko hari icyo ibona.
Okay, so now we come to Noah.
Tugaruke kuri Noah.
So think about, did Noah go to heaven? I think so.
Ese Noah yagiye mu ijuru.
I think him being in the ark was a picture. The ark is a picture of the cross and salvation. So I think Noah is in heaven.
Ndahamya ko Noah ari mu ijuru, yagiye mu ijuru kuko wa munsi yijiye mu nkuge cyari igishushanyo cyo kwerekana ko yizeye cyangwa se akishijwe.
Now, how did Noah get to heaven?
Ni gute Noah yagiye mu ijuru?
Let me read Genesis 6 and verse 9. I know that's backwards, but I have a reason. Genesis chapter 6, verse 9.
Dusome itangiriro igice cya 6 n'umurongo wa 9 ndetse n'uwa 8.
So it says, these are the records of the generation of Noah. Noah was, number 1, a righteous man. Number 2, blameless in his time. Number 3, Noah walked with God. Is that why he went to heaven?
Ibi ngibi dusomye hano mu gice cya 6 n'umurongo wa 9 bakavuga ngo Noah yatunganiraga Imana, yagendanye n'Imana. Ibi ngibi nibyo zatumye aja mu ijuru.
Now let's look at 2 Peter 2, and I wrote 9, but that's a mistake. It's 5. 2 Peter 2:5.
Petero wa kabiri igice cya 2 n'umurongo wa 5.
Okay, so Peter, one of Jesus' disciples, he says this.
Petero wa kabiri igice cya 2 n'umurongo wa 5.
And God did not spare the ancient world, but preserved Noah, a preacher of righteousness, with 7 others when he brought a flood upon the world of the ungodly.
Aho ngaho muri Petero wa mbere wa kabiri igice cya 2 n'umurongo wa 5 haravuga ngo namwe igice
2 Peter 2:5.
Yes, it says, kandi ubwo itababariye isi ya kera ahubwo ikarokorana Noah umubwiriza wo gukiranuka n'abandi barindwi gusa ubwo yatezaga isi y'abatubaha Imana umwuzure.
So now, did Noah go to heaven because he's a preacher?
Nowa yagiye mu ijuru kubera ko yari umuvugabutumwa.
Well, the Greek word doesn't mean a preacher. It means somebody that carries a message.
Nubwo Bibiliya yo itamwita ngo ni umuvugabutumwa kuko tubivuga, ivuga ngo ni umuntu utanga message cyangwa se ufite ubutumwa cyangwa se utanga message.
Or did Noah go to heaven because he was preaching righteousness?
Yagiye mu ijuru kubera ko yagaza yigisha ibyo gukiranuka.
Now, what do most people today think it means, a preacher of righteousness?
Niki abantu batekereza uyu munsi kuba ngo umubwiriza wo gukiranuka?
It means I'm the preacher and I'm saying you have to stop sinning and you have to start doing good things or you can't go to heaven.
Nuko ngo umubwiriza wo gukiranuka uyu munsi ni umuntu uvuga ngo ugomba gukizwa ukareka ibyaha ukareka ibi n'ibi ukaba umuntu mwiza, niba utabaye gutyo ntabwo uzaja.
Did you get me? And is that right? A preacher of righteousness is telling people they're sinners and they need to stop sinning.
Ni ukuvuga ngo umubwiriza wo gukiranuka karabwira abanyabyaha ngo bareke gukora ibyaha.
Now, I wish all of us would stop sinning, but it will not get us to heaven.
Ndifuza ko buri wese.
So now we go to Hebrews 11:7, and here is how we see that Noah went to heaven.
Abaheburayo igice cya 11 nibo baza kutwereka neza ko icyatumye Noah aja mu ijuru.
And we'll find out what kind of righteousness did Noah have.
Kandi tuzaza gusanga ubwoko bwo gukiranuka Noah yari afite.
So Hebrews 11:7, by faith Noah. I'm just using those three words to begin.
Noneho mu Baheburayo igice cya 11 hakaba ngo kubwo kwizera Noah.
Okay, so that means Noah was a believer.
Bisobanura ngo Noah yari uwizera.
By faith, Noah, being warned by God about things not yet seen. And I'm stopping in the middle of the verse there. By faith, yeah, go ahead.
Kwizera niko kwatumye, that is verse 7. Niko kwatumye Noah atinya Imana, amaze kuburirwa nayo ibitaraboneka.
So God warned Noah. God warns people. He lets them know they're in the wrong way.
Imana izikunda kuburira abantu ikababwira kwirinda ikintu.
Now God warned Noah about things that nobody had seen.
Imana iburira Noah ku bintu atarabona.
That's what it says, about things not yet seen. They would be seen later, but so far they had not been seen.
Aburirwa kuza atarabona ariko bizaza.
Now, what did we read in Hebrews 11:1? Faith is the proof of things not seen. And here it's talking about things not seen.
Twavuze kwizera mu gice cya 11 umurongo wa mbere ko kwizera ari ukumenya ibiri udashidikanya ibyo utareba n'amaso ko ari byo.
Now, what did God warn Noah about that nobody had ever seen before?
Ni ikihe Imana yaburiraga Noah atarabona?
A flood.
N'umwuzure.
There had never been a flood before.
Nta mwuzure wari warigeze ubaho mbere.
Why?
Kubera iki?
It had never rained before then.
Kuko nta mvura yari yakagwa.
So God told Noah it's going to start raining and not stop for 40 days and 40 nights and you'll get a flood. And everybody said, what is rain? We've never seen rain before, therefore we have never seen a flood.
Nokuvuga abantu Noah avuga ngo imvura izagwa iminsi 40 n'amajoro 40, abantu bakibaza ati imvura izagwa iturutse he? Ntayo turabona.
So also a big boat like an ark to save people from water when it never rained before, that people didn't believe that either.
Abantu rero no kubona ubwato cyangwa se inkuge ibazwa abantu bataranayibona mu imvura izagwa abantu baje muri ubwato abantu naho ntibabyemera ntibabyizera.
And number 4, there had never been anything that happened before that killed everybody on earth.
Nambere nta kintu cyari cyakabaho ngo cice abantu kwisi.
None of those had been seen.
Ibyo bintu byose mvuze nta cyari cyakaboneka mbere.
But Noah believed what God said even though nobody had seen those things before.
Ariko Noah we yizeye ibyo ngibyo nubwo yari atarabibona n'amaso.
Okay, then the second part of the verse, in careful preparation, he built an ark for the salvation of his family. And I'm stopping there also.
Ku murongo navuga ngo wabe akabaza inkuge yo gukiza abo mu nzu ye.
And that is the Greek word soteria, salvation. It's the word that means salvation from hell. It means S2, S3, salvation. So the ark is a picture of salvation.
Noneho kukubaza inkuge kwa Nowa hari ijambo ry'ikigiriki bakoresha ngo ni soteria, ivuga ngo gukira, ni ukuvuga ngo iriya nkuge yabajije rwari urugero cyangwa se igishushanyo cy'agakiza.
Now listen, by which he condemned the world when he built the ark, when he believed what God said and built the ark because he believed what God said, he condemned the unbelieving world.
Amaze kwizera akabaza inkuge akizera ibyo atarabona, ibyo ngibyo Imana yaje kubicisha iteka, ishyiraho isi iteka.
But now listen to this. Heir of the righteousness which is by faith.
Ishyiraho ari iteka, ariko Nowa we aragwa gukiranuka kuzanwa no kwizera.
Now, according to the New Testament, what righteousness will God accept from me so that I can go to heaven?
Urebye mu isezerano rishya ni ukuwe gukiranuka Imana isaba kugira ngo umuntu abashe kuba yaragujije.
Will he accept my righteousness? I'm a missionary.
Imana iremera gukiranuka kwanjye kubera ko ndi umumisiyoneri?
No, he won't do that. If I am the best human being in the world, will God accept that righteousness? No.
Naba ndi umuntu mwiza gusumba abandi bose mu isi, icyo ngicyo Imana yacyemera akajaza mu ijuru.
He only accepts the righteousness that is by faith, which means the righteousness that is a gift to us when we believe God's truth, the gospel.
Gukiranuka konyine Imana yemera no gukiranuka duheshwa no kwizera, duheshwa no kumva ubutumwa bwiza.
So did Noah go to heaven? Yeah.
Nowa yagiye mu ijuru.
Why?
Kubera iki? He went. Why? Kubera iki? Because of faith.
Because he believed and was given the gift of righteousness because he believed. That's what it says. He inherited the righteousness by faith.
Yagiye mu ijuru kubera ko yizeye, ahabwa iyo mpano yo gukiranuka.
So did Noah go to heaven in a different way than we will go to heaven?
Nowa yagiye mu ijuru mu nzira itandukanye n'iyo twebwe dushobora kuzagiramo tukaja mu ijuru.
No. Noah didn't go to heaven because he was blameless and that he was righteous and nobody else was. He went to heaven because he believed what he knew about the gospel.
Yagiye mu ijuru kubera ko yizeye ubutumwa bwiza, ntabwo yajanywe n'ikindi.
Now I'll say, why did I mention verse 9 before verse 8? Now let's read Genesis 6 verse 8.
Dusome rero umurongo wa munani twabanje gusoma uwa cyenda.
Genesis 6:8. But Noah found grace in the eyes of Jehovah.
Umunani haravuga ngo ariko Nowa agirira umugisha kuwiteka.
So what that means is Jehovah saw Noah by grace.
No kuvuga ngo Imana yabonye Nowa imurebera mu buntu bwayo, ibona iryo jambo bakoresha.
Okay, so now when we put Genesis together in Hebrews, Noah was saved by grace through faith, which is what Ephesians 2:8 says.
Ufashe rero kino gice cy'itangiriro gatandatu umurongo wa munani ukabihuza n'Abaheburayo, uraza gusanga Nowa yarakishijwe n'ubuntu bw'Imana.
Do you see that?
Ibyo ko murabibona.
Noah, God saw Noah by grace, not by works, and Noah had faith and got the righteousness of faith.
Nowa yagiriwe umugisha, iryo ni ryo jambo bari gukoresha mu Kinyarwanda, ariko Nowa yagiriwe ubuntu, Imana niho yamurebeye mu buntu, yamurebeye mu mirimo ye.
Now, some of you have heard me say, I often teach this, one Bible, but two messages. The Old Covenant and the New Covenant are different messages.
Benshi bazi ibyo ngenda mvuga ku bijanye n'isezerano cyangwa se amasezerano, Bibiliya imwe ifite ubutumwa bubiri.
Now, last week we read in Hebrews 11, that people that got saved at the old covenant time, they got saved in the way of faith, not by Moses' law, not by obedience, but by faith. Even the people in old covenant time were saved by faith.
muri aya masezerano yombi ni ukuvuga ngo mu isezerano rya mbere abakijijwe barimo ntibakijijwe n'ibyo bakoraga, ahubwo bakijijwe n'iri sezerano rishya arimo kwizera cyangwa se bakijijwe no kwizera.
But I want us to see the old covenant and the new are very, very different.
ariko turebye aya masezerano yombi, isezerano rya mbere n'isezerano rya kabiri aratandukanye, ntabwo ahuye.
So we just read Noah found grace. Okay, the word grace, how many times is grace in the Old Testament?
ni ukuvuga ngo Nowa yagiriwe ubuntu mu isezerano rya mbere rya kera, ijambo ubuntu rigarukamo kangahe?
You probably don't know. My computer tells me 9 times.
ni ukuvuga ngo Bibiliya jewe yajewe dushobora kutabibona muri Bibiliya yawe, ariko jewe igaragaza ko inshuro 9 arimo ijambo ubuntu
Do you think
rigaragaza.
the New Testament is similar?
muratekereza ko mu isezerano rishya bishobora kuba bisa cyangwa
No.
bitandukanye?
122 times the New Testament has the word grace.
isezerano rishya ryo rifite ubuntu 120,
122. 122.
ni ukuvuga ngo 122.
Okay, so in the Old Testament, grace is 9 times, and in the New Testament, 122 times. That is the
isezerano rya
word
mbere rya
grace.
kera rifite inshuro 9 rivuga ijambo ubuntu, ariko isezerano rishya rikavuga inshuro 122.
Okay, grace, Old Testament, New Testament. Now, the Old Testament is much bigger than the New Testament.
mwibuke ko isezerano rya kera ari ryo rinini gusumba isezerano rishya.
So if the Old Testament and the New Testament were having the same message, then you would have to have how many times the word grace in the Old Testament to equal the frequency of the New Testament?
nimba isezerano rishya n'isezerano rya mbere bishobora kuba bingana, zombi zakagombye ubugari bwabyo uko bingana kugira ngo bibashe kuzanya hariya kuri ya mibare, yaba rifite kangahe?
You would have to have grace 427 times in the Old Testament to make it have the same message.
kugira ngo bibashe kungana, isezerano rya mbere rya kera ryakagombye kuba rifite inshuro 427.
So I do a little bit of math and I find out that for every 1 time the Old Testament mentions grace, the New Testament mentions it 47 times.
inshuro imwe isezerano rya kera rigaragaje ijambo ubuntu, isezerano rya kera rikwiye kugaragaza inshuro 47.
Okay, so you will get grace almost 50 times more often in the New Testament than you do the Old Testament. They are not the same.
uko usanga ijambo ubuntu mu isezerano rishya ni imara 50 ukuba isezerano rya mbere.
Now, so Noah found grace, but he had the righteousness by faith. So let's compare those two words. Let's compare faith in the Old Testament and the New Testament.
Nowa yagiriwe ubwo buntu, mureke dukompara amagambo iri jambo ubuntu no kwizera muri ano masezerano yombi.
So faith is in the Old Testament 4 times.
Kwizera kuri kuvugwa inshuro 4 mu isezerano rya kera.
Okay, now faith is in the New Testament
kwizera mu isezerano rishya
246 times.
kukaza inshuro 246.
246 times
246
compared to 4 in the Old Testament.
ariko 4 gusa mu isezerano rya kera.
Now, if you compare again, if you multiply this times 3 or this times 3.5, because the Old Testament is bigger, then you end up with there should be 900 times. The Old Testament would have to say faith 900 times to be equal to the New Testament.
kugira ngo isezerano rya kera ribashe kungana n'isezerano rishya, ni ukuvuga ngo ugomba kuba hariya bikaza inshuro 900 kugira ngo isezerano rya kera ribashe kumara n'isezerano.
So if the Old Testament puts the same emphasis on faith as the New Testament, you would have to get the word faith 900 times instead of 4 times.
Kugira ngo bibashe kungana ugomba kugira inshuro 900 imara kane.
Okay, so that makes, sorry, just a second here. So grace is 1 time in the Old to 47 in the New, but for faith, it's 1 time in the Old for 215 times in the New Testament. Okay, are you getting me? Are you following this math?
Come again.
I can have 1 pen, or I can have 215 of them. In the Old Testament, it has 1 pen, which is called faith. In the New Testament, it has 215, which are called faith, which means faith is 200 times more frequent in the New Testament than the Old Testament.
Nuko isezerano risha riraruta cyane isezerano rya kera ugereranije ino mibari bigenda bivugwa kwizera n'ubuntu. Okay, I want you to see grace and faith, Ephesians 2:8. For by grace are you saved through faith. They're almost missing in the Old Testament, but they're very much in the New Testament. Como vai Efeso igice cya 2:8 havuga ngo mwakijwe n'ubuntu bwo kwizera. Ugenda usanga mu isezerano rishabagenda bagaruka kwizera bitandukanye n'isezerano ryawe.
But Hebrews 11 says the Old Testament people were accepted by God by faith, not by something they did.
Abaheburayo bakabisubiramo inshuro nyinshi ko abakera cyangwa se mu isezerano rya mbere bakijijwe no kwizera.
Now, who do you think is, after Jesus, who is the most famous or most important person in the Bible?
Ukuye Yesu ninde wundi muntu mutekereza w'ingenzi muri Bibiliya wakoze ibintu bikomeye muri Bibiliya? Ukuye Yesu kaho.
I thought somebody said Abraham. Did somebody say Abraham?
Moses.
Abraham. Clearly, Abraham.
The
most famous, most important, after Jesus, most famous, most important person in the Bible.
Umuntu w'ingenzi cyangwa se umuntu uzwi cyane muri Bibiliya ukuyemo Yesu.
Genesis 12, it is Abraham that got the promise of a great nation and the gospel. He was the first person to get both of those promises, and both of them go back to Abraham. Nobody else equal to him.
Nukuvuga ngo ni Abrahamu ukomeye ukuyemo Yesu muri Bibiliya. Noneho Abrahamu niwe wahawe amasezerano yo kuzaba ishanga rikomeye kandi n'amahanga yo mu isi akazaherwa umugisha muri we. Nukuvuga ngo niwe wahawe ayo masezerano.
Okay, so we'll see Abraham in heaven.
Abrahamu tuzamubona.
Why?
Kubera iki?
In Genesis 12, God told him, leave where you're going and go to the land I'll show you. And Abraham did that. Is that why he got to heaven?
Imana yabwiye Abrahamu ngo ave mu gihugu ciwe aje mu gihugu azamwereka. Kuba Abrahamu yaravuye mu gihugu akaja mu gihugu azamwereka nico catumye abo w'Imana cyangwa se atuzabona mu ijuru.
He obeyed God. Is that how he got to heaven? No.
Kubera ko Imana yamuhamagaye akayumvira akagenda.
What about this one? In Genesis 22, God said to Abraham, take your son, your only son, and go up on that mountain and sacrifice him. And Abraham did that, except the sacrifice.
Mwitangiriro 22 havugwa inkuru y'ukuntu Imana yabwiye Abrahamu ngo nagenda afata umwana wiwe Isaka aje kumutamba ku musozi.
But Abraham was going to sacrifice his son.
Abrahamu agiye gutamba umwana wiwe Isaka
until somebody came and said to him, no, don't sacrifice your son.
umuntu aramubwira ngo reka gutamba umwana wawe.
Who was that?
Ninde uwo muntu wamwe unareke gutamba umwana?
Jesus. The
Yes.
angel of the Lord, but that's Jesus.
marayika w'uwiteka ariko ashushanya Yesu.
Is Jesus. Jesus said to Abraham, when Abraham had the knife ready to put it in his son, Jesus said, no, don't sacrifice your son.
Aburahamu agiye gucumita umwana wiwe inkota ngo amwice, Imana iramubwira ngo reka umwana wawe.
But Abraham was willing. Is that why he went to heaven?
Aburahamu yarashaka, yari yamashije kumwica, cyo cyatumye agenda se.
Was Abraham really a good person?
Aburahamu yari umuntu mwiza cyane. Ko ndabaza.
Did Abraham have only one wife?
Aburahamu yari afite umugore umwe.
No, he had many wives.
Yari afite benshi.
Did Abraham ever sleep with his house girl?
Aburahamu yaba yararyamanye n'umuja wiwe cyangwa se umukozi we?
Yeah, her name was Hagar.
Umujakazi wiwe yitwaga Hagari.
Did Abram always trust Jehovah?
Aburahamu igihe cyose yari yizeye Yehova cyangwa Uwiteka?
No. God said Abram would have a son, but he didn't. So God said, Abram said, I'm not getting a son. Please let my servant inherit from me. He didn't believe God's promise.
Igihe cyarageze Aburahamu ko twari tuvuze ngo se yakomeje kwizera Imana. Oya ntiyabigeje ko byagezaho ashaka umwana, abona umwana utamwana zaraga abakozi abagaragu ibyanje.
And Ishmael and the Arabs and Islam are proof of that Abram didn't believe God. But he did get a son. He did get a son 25 years after the promise. What was the son's name? Isaac. What does that mean?
Isaka bisobanura gute?
He laughed.
Guseka.
He laughed. He laughed. When God promised Abraham, you're going to get a son, and his wife was too old, Abram laughed like, that's not possible.
Igihe Imana yababwiye ngo bazabona umwana bageze mu zabukuru, barasetse babona ibyo ngibyo.
And Sarah also lauged. Both of them didn't believe it was possible.
Tibizeraga ko ibyo bintu bishoboka, barasetse.
So God said, you're going to have a son. And Abraham said, that's not possible. Sarah in her tent was laughing. She said, no, I'm too old. That's a funny joke.
Nuko Imana kubwira Aburahamu na Sara bamaze kugera mu zabukuru ngo bazabona umwana, bahita baseka bata ibyo nizo kurakina cyangwa se kuradusetsa, niyo mpamvu bahise bakubita igitwe. So God told Abram to go to Canaan. The reason they laughed.
Yeah.
It is impossible. What he's saying, this guy is joking.
Yeah. Okay. Now, God told Abram, go to Canaan. He did, but he didn't stay there. Then he went to Egypt. That's not good. That's not faith. That's not obeying.
Again, that he went?
He went to Egypt.
Aja muri Egiputa, tiyaja muri Canaan. Nubwo yagiye muri Egiputa, sukumvira, sukubaha.
Because life was hard in Canaan, he thought Egypt is better. Let's go to Egypt. God never said that. He said Canaan. Abram went to Egypt.
Imana ivuga ko aja muri Canaan, ahita aja muri Egiputa, yatinye ko muri Canaan hashobora kuba hagoye, wenda muri Egiputa ariho haba hamworoheye.
In Egypt, Pharaoh's staff saw Abram's wife Sarai and said, wow, she's really beautiful. And Abram thought he would be killed for his wife. So he said, she's not my wife, she's my sister. You just go ahead and take her and sleep with her if you want to.
Noneho Aburahamu amaze kugera muri Egiputa n'umugore wiwe, abanyegiputa babona umugore wa Aburahamu baravuga ngo uyu mugore ni mwiza. Aburahamu atinya ko bashobora bamwica bamuziza umugore wiwe. Yambabwira umugore ati wewe tuvuge ko ndi umugore wawe, uri umugore wanje, uvuge ko uri mushiki wanje. Ugushaka nimba gushaka akujana.
And then later Abram went to a Philistine place called Gerar, and he was afraid again. So he made the same lie. She's not my wife, she's my sister, because he thought the Philistines would kill Abram to get the beautiful wife. So he lied again.
aja ku wundi Mufilisitiya Aburahamu n'umugore wiwe, atinya ko bashobora kumwica bamuziza umugore, babesha uwo Mufilisitiya.
So did Abram go to heaven because he's a good man?
Aburahamu yagiye mu ijuru kubera ko ari umuntu mwiza?
Sorry, if you think so, if you think he went to heaven because he's good, no.
Nimba yaragiye mu ijuru kubera ko ari umuntu mwiza,
I'll bet most of us here have done better things than Abram did.
Benshi muri twebwe hano bashobora kuba barakoze ibyiza gusumba Aburahamu.
So Hebrews 11:8. By faith, Abraham. By faith, Abraham. Not by being good, his own righteousness, but by faith, Abraham.
11 n'umurongo wa 8 haravuga ngo Aburahamu kubwo kwizera.
Now, it doesn't say, like it said of Noah, that Noah got the righteousness of faith. It doesn't say that in Hebrews about Abram.
It doesn't say?
Like it said Noah had the righteousness of faith. It doesn't in Hebrews 11 say Abraham had the righteousness of faith.
Ntabwo havuga ngo Noah ngo yabonye gukiranuka kubwo kwizera.
It says Noah was righteous by faith in Hebrews 11. It does not say that about Abraham.
Uko byavuze kuri Noah siko bivuze kuri Abraham.
But it's okay, because in Genesis 15:6, long before Hebrews, it says Abram believed Jehovah and he counted it as righteousness.
Iyo babivuze bitandukanye kuri Aburahamu na Noah, kuri Aburahamu baravuze igice cya 15:6 n'itangiriro, bavuga ngo Aburahamu yarizeye bimuhwandirizwa no gukiranuka.
So 2,000 years before the New Testament was written, it already said
ariko rurimi nyine Imana yakoresheje abanditsi bandika Bibiliya nirwo rurimi bakoresheje.
But if you look at this verse, by faith Abraham. Obedience and faith are different. Obedience and grace are different. The New Testament says you can't mix the two. It's one or the other. By faith, Abraham, when he was called, listened and accepted by going out to the place which he was to receive.
Kwizera niko kwatumye Aburahamu yumva aremera apana kumvira. Kuko kumvira no kwizera ni amagambo abiri atandukanye muri ano masezerano mutakwiye kuvanga.
And the word receive is an accurate translation. Receive is what you do with a gift. Somebody offers a gift, you receive it. Abram received what God was giving to him. He didn't refuse it.
Nukuvuga ngo Aburahamu yemeye yakiriye ikimana muhaye ntiyacanga ntiyagihakana.
Then it says, and he went out not knowing where he was going.
Nuko agenda atazi yaja.
Okay, there it is again. Faith is the proof of things not seen. Abram had never seen a place called Canaan, but he believed what God said and he went.
Ni igihamya kandi gishimangira ko kwizera, wizera ibyo utabona ariko ukabizizera kibiriho. Nubwo atarabona Canaan, ariko yavuye iwabo aja muri Canaan.
Now, that verse is a powerful verse in my life or I wouldn't be here now.
Uyu murongo n'uw'ingenzi kuri jewe.
When I thought God was asking me to stop being a farmer and be a missionary and leave the USA, I began to plan things and do things, but eventually it became an impossible situation.
Imana impamagara mva muri Amerika ngo ndeke kuba umuhinzi imbe umuvugabutumwa cyangwa se umumissionary korere Imana. Nagerageje gupanga gucora ngo ndebe ko hari uko byagenda ariko ntibyankundiye.
So I was doing everything I could, but there were too many blocks and too many doors, and I stopped, and it was impossible for me to continue.
Nukuvuga ngo nari umuhinzi nari mfite ibyo nakoraga ariko gerageza kureba uko nabireka ariko ntibyankundiye.
But then this verse came to my mind.
Uyu murongo wituzamo.
Abraham went out not knowing. not
uyu
knowing.
murongo unzamo uvuga ngo Aburahamu ngo yagiye atazi yaje.
That was me. I did not know how to solve the problems.
Uwo ni jewe sinari nzi uburyo bwo gukemura ibibazo.
That verse gave me peace, okay?
Uyu murongo-
Abraham didn't know. You took care of him. I don't know. You'll take care of me.
Nukuvuga ngo Aburahamu abwirwa kugenda iyo atazi aragenda aravuga ati simpazi ariko kubera ko wabivuze ndavuze mendagiye. Naje niko byangendekeye nemera kuva iwacu ndaza ngenda ntazi yaje menya ko ariyo igomba Imana ari ishobora gukemura ibibazo.
2 days after that verse gave me peace, 2 days later, the problem disappeared. By God's power, not by mine.
Ibibazo nibazaga uko bizagenda maze kuhabwa uno murongo nyuma y'iminsi 2 naje kumva mfite amahoro muri shema. Ariko ayo mahoro nagize si kubw'imbaraga zanje ni kubw'imbaraga z'Imana.
So the God that made impossible things happen for Abraham still does it in our time also.
Ibyo Imana yagiye ikora mu buzima bwa Aburahamu bw'ibidashoboka Imana irabikora uyu munsi mu buzima bwacu.
So we're still on Abraham, verse 9. By faith he lived as an alien in the land of promise.
Kwizera niko kwatumye aba umusuhuke mu gihugu yasezeranijwe aho n'umurongo wa 9.
All of us here are that.
Twebwe twese abari hano turabasuhuke.
None of us are in our home country.
Twebwe twese abari hano
Abraham wasn't either.
Okay,
he lived in the land of promise like it was a foreign land, living in tents with Isaac and Jacob, who were fellow heirs of the same promise.
Akaba nk'umushitsi muri cyo, akabana mu mahema na Isaka na Yakobo, abaraganywe nawe.
Now, verse 10 is very important. For he was looking for the city which has foundations. Foundation gives security, and something lasts a long time when it has a foundation.
Urufatiro ni ikintu cubakirwaho ibintu cyangwa se umusingi.
So Abram went to the promised land, but Abram was looking for something different than the promised land. Do you get that?
Aburahamu aja mu gihugu yasezeranijwe ariko arimo arashakisha ikindi kintu.
He was looking for a city which has foundations, whose architect, the planner, and builder is God, not a city that humans built, but a city that God built. That's what Abram was looking for.
Yategerezaga umudugudu wubatswe ku mfatiro uw'Imana yubatse ikawurema. Uwo mudugudu Aburahamu yategerezaga si uwubatswe n'intoki z'abantu.
So Abram wasn't looking to be a rich man on earth. Abram was looking to get to heaven.
Aburahamu ntabwo yabaye mu isi ngo agenda ashaka kuba umukire ku isi, ahubwo yashakishaga uburyo bwo kuzaba.
So he was in the promised land, but he wasn't satisfied with the promised land. So the promised land doesn't represent heaven, and Abram knew that. Now, verse 11, now it focuses on Sarah. By faith, even Sarah herself received power to conceive, to get pregnant, after the normal time of life.
Kwizera niko kwatumye na Sara abashishwa gusama inda nubwo yarashuze kuko yatekereje ko yasezeranije ariyo kwizera.
I didn't read the whole verse. Since she considered him faithful, she thought that God could do what he promised to do.
Sara yatekerezaga ko yasezeranije ariyo kwizera.
Now isn't that interesting? Did she really believe that?
Yarabyizeye ivyo ngivyo.
No. Why did she get Hagar to get a son if she believed she was going to get it? Yet God says she had faith, but we know from the story her faith was very small.
Hano ko haravuga ngo Sara ngo yarizeye ariko mu by'ukuri ivyo ni ukuri kubera iki yabwiye umujakazi we ngo Hagari ngo Why did
she is given credit for having faith, but we know from her story she didn't have faith.
karavuga ko afite kwizera ariko haraho bigaragara ko ataragufite?
And why is that? Grace.
Kubera ubuntu bw'Imana.
God says in Hebrews, Sarah had faith. But you read the story in Genesis, she didn't have faith.
Abaheburayo ko baravuga ngo Sara yari afite kwizera ariko hari mu itangiriro bakavuga ko tako yari afite.
Okay. Now, verse 12. Therefore, there was born even of one man, and him as good as dead, at that, as many descendants as the stars of the heaven in number, and innumerable as the sand which is by the sea. That is the whole verse 12.
Umurongo wa 12 ukavuga ngo ni nacyo cyatumye umuntu umwe kandi uwo yari ameze nk'intumbi akomokwaho n'amahanga n'inyenyeri zo mu ijuru kuba benshi kandi bangana n'umusenyi uri mu kibaya cy'inyanja utabarika.
So I want you to see that Abram did not have strong faith and Sarah didn't have strong faith, but they had some faith. They knew the truth a bit and at least partly accepted.
Biragaragara ko Sara ndetse na Aburahamu bari bafite kwizera rimwe ikindi gihe nta kwizera bari bafite.
So God did what was impossible for Abram and Sarah to do, and that's how we go to heaven, by believing in Jesus doing what's impossible for us to do.
Imana iza gukora ibidashoboka mu buzima bwa Sara na Aburahamu. Imana idukorera natwe bidashoboka. Nta kindi gituma tuja mu ijuru nuko Imana yadukoreye ibidashoboka twebwe bitadushoboke.
Now we get to Hebrews 11:13, and it's another key. It's a very key verse.
Umurongo wa 13 nawo tugezeho nurundi rufunguzo.
Okay, I'm breaking it into pieces again. Hebrews 11:13. All these died in faith.
Abo bose bapfuye bakizera.
Who's he talking about?
Aba ni bande bahaye abavugwa hano?
He's talking about everybody that he has mentioned, from Abel to Enoch, and now he's up to Abram and Sarah. He's talking about all of them, but he's talking about all of the Old Testament believers.
Aha bavuze ngo abo bose bapfuye bakizera, nubwo guhera kuri ba Abeli ukaza bari abantu bose bo mu isezerano rya mbere.
Now, notice this. All these died in faith without receiving the promises.
Bakizera batarahabwa ibyasezerano.
Now, we're taught today, if you believe, you'll get something. It didn't work for these people.
Uyu munsi twubwirwa ko niba twizeye hari icyo turi buze kwakira, ariko byashobokeye aba bari bizeye. Oya.
All these died in faith. They were all believers, but they did not get what they understood was promised.
Bapfuye bakizera ariko batarahabwa ibyasezerano.
But having seen them and welcomed them from a distance.
Ahubwo babiroraga biri kure cyane bakabyishima.
Now what does that mean?
Icyo bisobanura iki kubibona biri kure bakabyishima?
Like Abram, he knew that the promised land wasn't what he really needed. He knew he needed heaven, a city that had foundations built by God.
Aburahamu ntiyabonaga ko muri Kanani aricyo gihugu ciwe cyangwa se ariyo ntumbero yiwe, ahubwo yifuza undi mudugudu.
So these people, by faith, they saw something. Faith is the evidence of, or the proof of things you don't see. So by faith, they saw things. They saw heaven.
Kubwo kwizera babonaga ikintu, babonaga ijuru. Kuko tugomba kwizera nukumenya rwose udashidikanya yuko izo utabona n'amaso biharariza.
That'll be clearer as we get to the next verses. Having seen them and welcomed them by faith, by believing what God said, they saw them from a distance and confessed they were strangers and exiles on the earth.
Ahubwo babiroraga biri kure cyane bakabyishimira bakavuga ko ari abashitsi n'abimukira mu isi.
And the word confessed here is the same Greek word that a lot of people think means you have to confess your sins and then they'll be forgiven. Same Greek word here. Were these people confessing their sins? No.
Nuko ijambo bakoresheje hano rimwe bavuze ngo babiroraga biri kure bakabyishimira ngo bakavuga ko ari abashitsi mu isi. Ni rya jambo abantu bakoresha ko kwatura abantu bazaba ngo n'ukwatura ibyaha. Aba bantu ntabwo batuye ibyaha hano ahubwo bavugaga bemezanyaga n'Imana.
Okay, so get that definition out of your mind that confess means you admit to God you sinned. That's not what it means.
Icyo kwatura tugikuremo cyo kuvuga ngo n'ukubwira Imana amakosa wakoze.
So I'm going to read that word. I'm saying a better translation is agreed. They agreed with God. What God said, they accepted what He said.
Ahubwo bandisho bavugaga Imana ivuga cyangwa se bakemezanya n'Imana.
Now, let me read that very part in 4 different translations.
Reka mbisome uno murongo usome mu zindi nyandiko zitandukanye.
And ESV and Muntz and New English and Weymouth and many have this, having acknowledged that they were strangers and exiled. They agreed. They recognized it.
Bamenyaga bari bazi neza ko ari abashitsi n'abimukira.
NIV says they admitted they were strangers and exiles.
Bemeraga ko ari abashitsi n'abimukira.
A translation called The Message says they accepted the fact that they're strangers and exiles.
Bemeraga ko ari abashitsi n'abimukira.
New Living Translation says they agreed. That's the best definition for
baremeraga.
Okay, now the reason I'm emphasizing this and saying this is a key is these people had faith but did not get what they thought they were going to get.
Mpamvu ndi gushimangira kuno murongo ari urufunguzo aba bantu barizeraga ariko bari batarahabwa ibyasezeranijwe.
They had the proper faith.
Bari bafite kwizera nyakuri.
They had the true faith.
Bakagira kwizera kukuri.
They had the greatest faith because the Bible is commending them.
Bibiliya irabahamya.
Okay, now the greatest faith is like these guys. When you continue to trust God even when you don't get what you thought you were going to get.
Ababizera bakomezaga kwizera nubwo batari babona ibyo basezeranijwe. Nukuba ngo kugushimangira iyo ukomeje kwizera nubwo utarabona ibyo wizeye ariko ukwiye gukomeza.
Now, I just want to compare quickly Matthew and 21:22. I have to double check because I make so many
Matayo igice cya
22. A lot of false teaching is done based on that verse and other verses, and Hebrews 11 shows that these are often taught wrong.
Uyu murongo nusoma neza uraza gusanga abantu baza bawigisha nabi.
Okay, Matthew 21:22. All things you ask in prayer, believing, you will receive it.
Icyo muzasaba cyose mwizeye muzagihabwa.
Hebrews 11:13. These all died in faith and did not receive it.
Abaheburayo 11 murongo wa 13 akavuga ngo aba bose bapfuye bakizera ariko batarahabwa ibyasezerano.
How do we explain that?
Ibyo wabisobanura gute?
Well, you have to put the whole Bible together, not one verse, and use one verse to make money as a false preacher or something.
Ufashe imirongo ya Bibiliya ukagenda uyihuza byagufasha kudafata Bibiliya ngo uyihindure nk'ikintu cyo gushaka kifaranga.
Faith does not guarantee you'll get an easier or a better life on earth. It doesn't guarantee that. That is not God's promise.
Ntabwo kwizera gutuma ibintu bitworohera hano mu isi ngo tubimana ngo ikore guhita ibikora aho ngaho.
But faith, if it's in the gospel of Jesus Christ, does guarantee eternal life in heaven 100%.
Ariko kwizera nyakuri gushimangira cyane yuko kuja mu ijuru ari ukuri cyangwa se ari gufite garanti ntagushidikanywaho.
Okay, faith is not when I want something and I make myself believe that God is going to give it to me and then He gives it to me. No, that is not faith. That's a lie.
Kwizera ntabwo ari ukuvuga ngo icyo ntekereza ngo nimbwira ngo Imana ngo impeze iki kintu runaka ngo ihite ikimpereza aho ngaho, icyo ni ikinyoma.
Now, Hebrews 11, verse 14. We'll keep moving through here.
dukomereze kuri uno murongo w'Abaheburayo.
For those who say such things make it clear, okay, that they are seeking a country of their own.
Umurongo wa 14, abavuga batyo baba berekana yuko bashaka gakondo.
What does he mean? Those who say these things? He's talking about the people he has mentioned earlier in Hebrews 11.
Aba bantu bavuzwe haruguru nibo bahaya bavuga ngo abavuga gutyo.
That Abraham was looking for a city that has foundations, not the promised land, heaven.
Bariya bavuga ngo abashitsi n'abimukira nibo bakomereje ahangaha bakavuga ngo barashaka gakondo.
For those who say such things make it clear they are seeking a country of their own.
Abavuga batyo baba berekana yuko bashaka gakondo yabo.
Now Abraham already had a country. God gave him a country.
Aburahamu kera yari afite igihugu ciwe.
The whole country of Canaan was given to Abraham. He owned it.
Kanani cyari igihugu ca Aburahamu.
But Abraham was not looking for the promised land. He was looking for a different country.
Ariko Aburahamu nubwo ari muri Kanani tiyumvaga yarashitse
And
yashakaga ikindi.
And verse 16 adds, he was looking for a better country, not a country on earth, but a country in heaven.
Umurongo wa 16 urabivuga neza ko ngo yashakaga ikindi gihugu ciza.
Now what all of this is saying is the prosperity gospel is wrong. It's not biblical.
Niyo mpamvu usanga buno butumwa bw'amafanyikiro atari ubutumwa bw'ukuri ari kinyo.
Okay, verse 15. And indeed, if they had been thinking of that country from which they went out, they had an opportunity to return to it.
Iyo baba barakumbuye, iyo bavuyemo baba barabonye uburyo bwo gusubirayo.
So what that means is when they got to the promised land, it wasn't easy. There was a lot of fighting, there's war, there's enemies, there's a lot of problems there.
Hariya mu gihugu cy'isezerano bari Aburahamu. Murabizi ko nkunda runo rwandiko rw'Abaheburayo cyane.
And I think if we understand Hebrews well, then the other books in the New Testament we study later will be easier and quicker.
Mu by'ukuri nidusobanukirwa urwandiko rw'Abaheburayo tukarwumva neza bizatworohera kwiga zino zandiko zindi zizaba zisigaye muri Bibiliya.
So let's go back to Hebrews 11:16. And I only read the first half. I'll read the whole verse now, and you can read the whole verse. So again, Hebrews 11:16 is talking about the Old Testament, the famous Old Testament believers.
No kuvuga ngo hano mu murongo wa 10 which verse
16.
Uyu murongo wa 16 uraza kuvuga hejuru y'abantu bazwi cyane mu isezerano rya kera.
But as it is, they desire a better country, that is a heavenly one. And I didn't read this before. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them.
Ariko noneho bashaka gakondo irusha ico gihugu kuba ciza ariyo yo mu ijuru. Umurongo tutari twasomye mbere nuvuga ngo nico gituma Imana idakorwa n'isoni zo kwitwa Imana yabo.
So the main thing I want to see here, two things. One, life on this earth is not that important.
Ico nshaka ko tukura muri uno murongo nuko ubuzima bw'aha mw'isi ntabwo ari ubw'ingenzi cyane.
And we're going to see later in Hebrews that many of God's people suffered much and were even killed on this earth. This earth is not the good place.
Nukuba ngo hano kw'isi ntabwo ari ahantu heza kuko benshi muri izi ntwari zo kwizera bagiye bapfa impfu zibabaje cyangwa se impfu zibabaje kubera kwizera kwabo.
We need to make sure we're going to heaven. And then if we have problems on this earth, it's okay. And in fact, all of us will have problems on this earth.
Nukuba ngo mwisi nitugira ibibazo taco bizaba bitwaye ariko twamekize cyo twamenye neza tuzashakisha.
Then the second part of the verse, God is not ashamed to be called their God. Why?
Uyu murongo uvuga ngo nico gituma Imana idakorwa n'isoni zo kwitwa Imana yabo no kubera iki?
God is saying some people on earth, he's proud, he's happy to be their God. Which are those people?
Imana yari inejejwe.
There are some people on the earth, God is happy about them and happy to be called their God.
Hari abantu hano ku isi Imana yishimira, ikishimira ntigira isoni zo kwitwa Imana yabo. Ni iki kiba cyabiteye?
Who are those people?
Kandi abo bantu ni bande?
What can you do that God will be so happy, He will be proud to be your God?
Ni iki cyatuma Imana ikwishimira ikanezerwa kwitwa wowe kwitwa Imana ikanekura umwana wayo cyangwa se ari Imana yawe?
To recognize that this life is not important, but heaven is.
Nukwizera udashidikanya. You believe Him.
But in this verse, that's right, but in this verse it is recognizing that heaven is the good place, earth is not the important place.
Muri uno murongo hagaragaza yuko ubu buzima bw'aha mu isi ntabwo ari ubw'ingenzi cyane, ahubwo ijuru niryo ry'ingenzi cyane. Kandi urabibona no mu karongo gasoza.
So this verse is saying these people desired heaven more than anything on this earth, and for that reason God is not ashamed of them.
Noneho aba bantu kuko bahari babona ubuzima bwabo ku isi cyangwa se ku isi atari ahantu h'ingenzi cyane, atari heza, bakabona ko ijuru ari ryo ryiza gusumba, nicyo cyatumaga Imana ibishimira kandi ntigire isoni zo kwitwa Imana yayo.
Verse 17, by faith Abraham, when he was tested, and I stop there, tested.
Kwizera niko kwatumye Aburahamu atamba Isaka.
Does yours say tempted or tested?
Sacrificed.
No, before the sacrifice.
Kwizera niko kwatumye Aburahamu atamba Isaka.
By faith Abraham was tested.
Yeah, when he was tested.
Does it say tested or tempted?
I think it is yageragezwa tempted.
Yeah, wrong. It's not tempted, it's tested.
The temptation. Yeah.
Not temptation. I don't think there's any place in the Bible where temptation is the right translation.
Ndatekereza ko muri Bibiliya nta hantu bazana ijambo yo kugeragezwa, nubwo twebwe tugenda tubisanga mu ndimi zacu, ariko ibo bakazana ijambo ryo gupima ry'igipimo.
Temptation is about, are you good or bad? Well, we're all bad. We're all sinners. So that is not the meaning.
Nukuvuga ngo kugeragezwa nukureba beza n'ababi, ariko twese turi babi.
Testing is about how much do you know? Do you know enough or do you need to learn more? That's what this is, testing.
Numutihani. Nukuvuga ngo iyo bari mutihani ikizamini baba bashaka gupima uzi bingana gute? Uzi bingana gute? Uzi byinshi, uzi bikeya. Niho haba humvikana muri Bibiliya cyangwa ujye wumvise, ariko twebwe bakaba bazana ngo nibigerageze.
Okay, what was the test? When God said, sacrifice your son.
Ikizamini cyari gutamba umwana we Isaka.
Okay, now God didn't intend Isaac to be killed, but Abram didn't know that.
Imana yo siyo yari intego yo kugira ngo atambe Isaka, ahubwo Aburahamu we ntiyarazi ko ariko bimeze, we yarazi ko ari kumutamba.
Now this verse is going to show us Abram had a picture of the gospel in his own son and his own sacrifice.
Aha muri iyi nkuru biraza kutwereka ko Aburahamu yari yizeye ubutumwa bwiza muri iriya nkuru yo gutanga umwana.
By faith Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promise was offering up his only begotten son.
Kwizera niko kwatumye Aburahamu atamba Isaka ubwo yasuzumaga cyangwa se yakoreshwaga ikizamini, kandi dore uwasezeranijwe ibyasezeranijwe yaragiye gutamba umwana we w'ikinege.
Okay, now can you think of another verse in the New Testament that also says his only begotten son?
Hari ahandi hantu ushobora kumenya muri Bibiliya ngo umwana we w'ikinege, havuga umwana we w'ikinege?
Yes.
Yohana 3:15.
And in the Greek, which the New Testament was written in first, it's exactly the same words. Only begotten son, monogenes, only begotten son.
Mu Kigiriki ho bahita bakoresha ijambo rimwe aha ngaha dukoresheje mu Heburayo na hariya muri Yohana, umwana wiwe w'ikinege.
So Abram did not sacrifice his son, but God used that to be a picture that God would sacrifice his son Jesus instead of Abram sacrificing his son Isaac.
Aha muri iyi nkuru yo gutamba umwana wiwe w'ikinege yari igishushanyo cyo kwereka Aburahamu gutamba Isaka. Si Isaka wari ugenderewe gutamba wa Aburahamu, ubwo Imana yashakaga gutamba umwana wayo w'ikinege.
And verse 18 explains this was really a hard test. And it was he to whom it was said, in Isaac your descendants shall be called.
Murongo wa 18 uwo yabwiwe ivuze ngo kuri Isaka niho urubyaro ruzakwitirirwa.
So Abram was thinking, God gave me this son Isaac as a miracle 25 years after the promise. Now you're asking me to kill my son? This doesn't make sense.
Aburahamu niko kubwira Imana ati Imana nabonye umwana waje mu zabukuru nyuma y'imyaka 25 none kandi ugiye kuntwara umwana ngoje kumutamba kandi ibi bintu ntabwo bisobanutse.
But here God helped Abram to think in the right way. So verse 19 says, he considered or thought that God is able, has enough power to raise people from the dead. And I'm stopping there. So why was Abram willing to sacrifice his son? Because he believed that God could even make his dead son become alive again.
Icyatumye Aburahamu atamba umwana wiwe w'Isaka yari yizeye yuko Imana ishobora no kuzura uwapfuye.
Then it says, from which death he, Abram, also received him, Isaac, back as a type, as an illustration, as an example.
Nico cyatumye amugarurirwa kuzuza.
Okay, now I'm not sure how yours says that, but this is clear. This is saying that Abraham sacrificing Isaac, but Isaac didn't die, he's alive, is a picture of God sacrificing Jesus who did die, but resurrected.
Mu by'ukuri aha sinzi uko bivuga mu nyandiko yanyu, ariko bigaragara ko Isaka yapfuye akongera akazuka, bifite igishushanyo yuko Yesu Kristo yapfuye arongera arazuka.
And the word type means God's plan was this story about Abraham and Isaac and the sacrifice was a picture or a teaching about what God would do later by his own son.
Nuko ngo rero inkuru ya Isaka na Aburahamu kumutamba cyari igishushanyo cyo gutanga kwa Yesu Kristo ku musaraba.
So Abraham must have known something about the gospel.
Biragaragara ko Aburahamu hari icyo yari azi ku bijanye n'ubutumwa.
It says in Galatians 3:8 that the scriptures preached the gospel to Abraham before the gospel really came.
Niyo mpamvu mu Bagalatiya mu gice cya 3 umurongo wa 8 havuga ngo ibyanditswe byabwirije Aburahamu iby'ibitaraba ubutumwa bwiza.
So how did Abraham go to heaven?
Ni gute Aburahamu yagiye mu ijuru?
By believing the gospel, the same way that anybody goes to heaven.
Kwizera ubutumwa bwiza niko Aburahamu yagiye mu ijuru nk'abandi bose.
Now, verse 20.
By
faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau.
Kwizera niko kwatumye Isaka ahesha Yakobo na Esau imigisha y'ibizaba.
Now, if you read Romans 9, you will see that Jacob was blessed and Esau was left out and he was crying. But you have to put that with this. Both of the sons were blessed.
Usomye mu Baroma inkuru ya Esau na Yakobo ubona ko Esau atahawe umugisha ariko Yakobo we yahawe umugisha. Ariko bihujije naha mu Baheburayo usanga bombi barahawe.
Verse 21. By faith Jacob, as he was dying, blessed each of the two sons of Joseph and worshipped, leaning on the top of his staff.
22 hakaba ngo kwizera niko kwatumye Yakobo ubwo yaragiye gufa ahesha imigisha abana ba Yosefu bombi agasenga yishingikirije ku ifundo rw'ikoniye.
So Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau, but now it focuses on Jacob, not Esau. Why?
Hano Yakobo na Esau bombi baravukana ariko noneho bahita bakomeza kuri Yakobo Esau bamushira ku ruhande.
Jacob was the second born. we have to be born again. It is the second covenant that gets us to heaven. The second. Jacob is the second. So God worked through Jacob.
Imana rero hano gukomezanya na Yakobo nuko Yakobo yari wa kabiri, nukuba ngo bifite ubusobanuro bw'icya kabiri, kuvuka ubwa kabiri, nukuba ngo mu kuvuka ubwa kabiri cyangwa icya kabiri n'ikimana igenda yagura n'ikigenda ikuza n'ikigenda igarukaho n'ikigenda igarukaho.
Now why does it say as Jacob was dying he was leaning on his stick?
Nukuba ngo igihe ngo Yakobo yapfaga yari yiseguye inkoni ye.
In the Old Testament, Moses' stick and now Jacob's stick, what does it represent? It represents the cross.
Nukuba ngo iyi nkoni yo kwisegura ari igihe cya Mose ndetse na Aroni, iriya nkoni yashushanyaga umusaraba.
Verse 22, by faith Joseph, when he was dying, made mention of the exodus of the sons of Israel and gave orders concerning his bones.
Kwizera niko kwatumye Yosefu ubwo yaragiye gufa yibuka ibyo kuva muri Egiputa kw'Abisiraheli agategeka iby'amagufwa.
Okay, now important verses again. Starting at verse 23, it's going to say 5 times, by faith Moses, and it's not going to mention Moses' law at all, but 5 times, by faith Moses.
Nukuba ngo no murongo wa 23 bagiye kugaruka kuri Mose, kandi Mose bagarukaho baragenda bagaruka ku kwizera ntabwo bagaruka ku mategeko ya Mose.
Now, Moses is the one that God gave the law through. So many, I would almost say most people think Moses is about the law and Moses obeyed his law and that's how Moses got to heaven. No, that's not true at all.
Abantu benshi bazi ngo Mose icyamuzanye na amategeko Imana yahaye Mose amategeko, nuko ngo icyo abantu bazi kuri Mose nuko ari we wazanye amategeko kandi akanayumvira, ariko si cyo cyonyine cyamuzanye.
Moses who brought the law, the 10 commandments, how did he go to heaven?
Mose ubwiwe wazanye amategeko 10 ni cyatumye aja mu ijuru.
By faith, not by Moses' law, not by his own law, not by the 10 commandments.
Yagiye mu ijuru kubwo kwizera tiyagiye kubwo amategeko 10 yazanye.
Now, this first mention of faith, it's actually Moses' parents. Okay, so by faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents because they saw he was a beautiful child and they were not afraid of the king's plan.
Kwizera niko kwatumye Mose arashwa n'abavyeyi be amezi 3 amaze kuvuka, kuko babonye ako kana ko ari keza tibatinya itegeko ry'umwami.
Now, is Moses a real person? Well, we know that the king at his time was Tutmosis I. We know that. Nobody doubts that. So since Moses is mentioned with the king in this verse, we should believe that Moses was a real person too.
Ese Mose n'umuntu ugaragara wabayeho, muzukuri biragaragara ko Mose ari umuntu wabayeho ugaragara, tudukwiye gushidikanya kubaho kwa Mose.
Now verse 24, second time, by faith Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh. That's this Tutmosis I, son of Pharaoh's daughter, and that is Hatshepsut. We know who that is also.
Kwizera niko kwatumye Mose ubwo yaramaze gukura yanga kwitwa umuhungu w'umukobwa wa Farawo. Twaje gusanga n'umukobwa wa Farawo yitwa Hatshepsut.
So we don't know 100%, but probably the daughter of the Pharaoh that lifted Moses out to the water, the river Nile, was a lady called Hatshepsut.
Uyu mugore wakuye Mose hariya muri kariya gaseke ku mazi akaza kumutunga, nukuba ngo
now, this is a picture of Hatshepsut's temple. We know she's real. Her temple is still there in Egypt. And I've been there with my wife. We climbed up those stairs for Hatshepsut's temple. And so this was built by the lady that lifted Moses out of the water. Hatshepsut's temple in Egypt. I've been there. I walked up those steps.
Bibiliya rero ivuga ntabwo ari amakuru gusa cyangwa se ibintu byo guhimba bitabaho n'ibintu bigaragara biba bihari.
Now, so Hatshepsut was famous
Uyu Hatshepsut yari
and rich and powerful.
yari umutunzi, yari
And her
akomeye.
father, Thutmose I, was famous and rich and powerful.
Ni ukuvuga ngo yari akomeye, yari azwi.
But Moses, when he grew up, he said, I'm not her daughter. I reject Hatshepsut and Thutmose I.
Mose amaze gukura ntiyakomeza kwemera kwitwa umwana w'umukobwa wa Farawo.
Verse 25, why? Choosing rather to endure hardship with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin.
25 hakaba ngo ahubwo agahitamo kurenganywa n'ubwoko bw'Imana abirutisha kumara umwanya yishimira ibineza.
Why did he do that? Verse 26. Considering the reproach or the rejection of Christ greater riches than the treasures of Eden. He was looking to the reward, heaven.
Kuko yatekereje yuko gutukwa bamuhora Kristo ari ubutunzi buruta ubw'abanyegiputa babise bwose kuko yatumbiraga ingororano azagorora.
So it says by faith Moses. Faith means you believe something. What did Moses believe?
Kubwo kwizera Mose, niki Mose yari yizeye?
Not the law he brought.
Sa amategeko
It
yazanye
says
yari yizeye.
he chose Christ. That's
Ahubwo
Jesus.
yizeye Kristo.
So we'll see Moses in heaven. If you go to heaven, you'll see Moses there, but he won't be there because of his law. He'll be there because of Jesus and the cross.
Nukuvuga ngo Mose tuzamubona mu ijuru, abizeye bakaja mu ijuru bazamubona Mose. Nukuvuga ngo ntazagenda kubera amategeko yazanye 10, azagenda kubera ko yizeye Kristo.
Okay, now, did Moses know Jesus?
Mose yarazi Yesu.
I think so.
Yes.
I don't think he knew as much. He didn't have as much information. He didn't have the New Testament, but there's a lot of evidence that Moses knew Jesus.
Biragaragara ko Mose yarazi Yesu nubwo atazi byinshi k'ibyo tuzi twebwe uyu munsi kuko iwe yabayeho n'igihe cy'isezerano rishaka itaraba.
The burning bush. Who was that talking out to the burning bush?
Hariya mu gashamba kakaga umuriro.
The angel of Jehovah. The angel of Jehovah is Jesus. So Moses was talking with Jesus 3,400 years ago.
Yavuganye na marayika Uwiteka ariko uriya marayika afite ishusho ya Yesu Kristo.
And I even think that bush or that tree that was made out of wood, that's a picture of the cross. The fire is a picture of hell. Right there, Jesus and the cross and hell are a picture, and that's where Moses turned around and knew what the true God was like.
Nukuvuga ngo iriya nkuru y'igihuru cyashakaga umuriro, nukuvuga ngo igihuru cyangwa se igiti kigaragaza umusaraba, umuriro nawo kagaragaza Gehinomu.
The children of Israel were led by Moses through the wilderness, and there was a pillar of cloud and a pillar of fire, and it says that was the angel of Jehovah. The angel of Jehovah is Jesus. So Jesus led them through the desert 40 years.
Abayisiraheli bari mu butayu, nukuvuga ngo bagaza bagenda bayoborwa n'ikingi y'igicu n'ikingi y'umuriro. Nukuvuga ngo bivuga ko bayobowe na marayika, nabo bari bifite igishushanyo cyerekana ko ari Yesu wari ubayoboye mu butayu imyaka 40.
God gave the instructions for the tabernacle to Moses, and in John 1:14 it says the word became flesh and tabernacled with us. So Moses, by building the tabernacle, understood about the gospel of Jesus.
Mose yubaka n'ihema, nukuvuga ngo navyo ihema yubakaga naryo yarasobanukiwe n'ubutumwa bwiza kuko ihema niwe ryavugaga niwe ritungaho.
In John 3:14 it says, as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up.
Hari ijambo rivuga muri Yohana rivuga ngo kuko Mose yamanitse inzoka mu butayu niko n'umwana w'umuntu azamanikwa ku giti.
But God accomplished the Passover through Moses. In 1 Corinthians 5:7 it says Christ is our Passover. So the Passover Moses wrote about was a picture of Christ's death on the cross.
Nukuvuga bya Pasaka Mose yavuze mu isezerano rya kera byavugaga Kristo kuko urebye Abakorinto ba mbere 5:7 havuga ngo Kristo niwe Pasaka yacu.
A rock followed Israel through the wilderness, And it says in 1 Corinthians 10:4, the rock that followed them, it says the rock followed them, that was Christ.
Mu Bakorinto ba mbere 10 hakavuga ngo urutare rwabakurikiraga mu butayu bivuga ko yari Kristo.
It says in John 6:31, Moses gave manna in the wilderness, but then Jesus said, I am the true bread. So Moses and the manna pictured Jesus.
Manu Abisiraheli babonye mu butayu ni ukuvuga ngo Mose avuga ko ari we wabahaye manu, ariko Yesu azaza akavuga ngo ni jewe wabahaye manu.
But maybe most important, John 5:46, Jesus said, Moses believed in him. Moses believed in Jesus.
Yohana 5:46 hakavuga ngo Mose yizeye Yesu, yaranyizera.
Okay, so don't get confused. Like a lot of people that say they're Christians, they get confused and they think obeying Moses' law is what a Christian does. No, Moses didn't do that. He believed in Jesus Christ and the cross.
Muzukuri ntitushukike cyangwa se ngo tubeshwe ngo Mose yajanywe mu ijuru no kumvira cyangwa se kubera ko yakomeje amategeko, ahubwo yajanywe no kwizera, kuko abantu benshi ahangaha bazi ko gukizwa kwabo cyangwa se kuja mu ijuru kwabo ari ukumvira, ari ukubahiriza.
Now in verse 27 again it says, by faith he, Moses, left Egypt, not fearing the anger of the king, for he endured as seeing him, Jesus, who is unseen.
Kwizera niko kwatumye ava muri Egiputa tatinya umujinya w'umwami, kuko yihanganiye kureba itaboneka.
28, by faith he, Moses, kept the Passover and the sprinkling of the blood, so that he who destroyed the firstborn would not touch them.
Kwizera niko kwatumye arema Pasaka no kuminjagira amaraso, kugira ngo urimbura abana b'imfura atabakoraho.
Verse 29, by faith they, Moses and 2 million Israelites, passed through the Red Sea as though they were passing through dry land, and the Egyptians, when they tried, were drowned.
Kwizera niko kwatumye baca mu nyanja itukura kabaca ku musozi, abanyegiputa nabo babigerageje bararengerwa.
Now I think Hebrews 11, the faith chapter, talks more about Moses than any other person in the Bible. Why? Because God knew we would be confused and think that Moses obeyed the law, and God is emphasizing, no, he believed in Jesus and the cross.
Mu by'ukuri Abaheburayo umurongo wa 10 kino gice cya 11 bagenda bagaruka kuri Mose kuko yizeye, kuko Imana yabona abantu bashobora gutekereza ko Mose yaje kumana kubera ko yahawe amategeko cyangwa se yuzuye amategeko, ariko agenda agaruka kuko kwizera Mose babisubiramo kenshi.
But eventually Moses died because of his disobedience. One time Moses died and then Joshua took over.
Kutumvira kwa Mose rero kwatumye apfa atageze mu gihugu cy'isezerano, noneho Yoshua ahita komera.
Moses never got in the promised land. Isn't that amazing? The leader, the lawgiver, never got in the promised land, but Joshua, the name which Jesus, he took them in the promised land.
Kandi akaba ari nawe kiyogoza umuyobozi mukuru tagere mu gihugu cy'isezerano, Yoshua akaba ari we ubageza mu gihugu.
And the first fight in the promised land was Jericho.
Ahantu barwanye bwa mbere mu gihugu cy'isezerano ni Yeriko barwanye.
So verse 30, by faith the walls of Jericho fell down after they had been circled for 7 days.
Kwizera niko kwatumye inkike z'amabuye z'i Yeriko ziriduka bamaze kuzizenguruka.
Now, is this a true story about Jericho? Yes.
Iyo ni inkuru y'ukuri y'i Yeriko ibyabaye.
So faith is not when you believe something that's not true. Faith is when you found out what is true and accepted the truth.
Kwizera ntabwo ari ukwizera gusa ibintu, ahubwo ni ukwizera bijya wizeye bikagaragara ko ari iby'ukuri.
Okay, so I've copied an article here from the Associated Press in February 1990. AP, Associated Press. This is a news item written in February 1990.
Iki ni ikinyamakuru cyanditswe mu kwezi kwa kabiri tariki 24 mu mwaka wa 1990.
And this is not a Christian news organization. It is non-Christian.
Ntabwo ari ikinyamakuru cy'abakristo ni.
Here's what it said. the walls of Jericho did come tumbling down as recounted in the Bible according to a new archaeological study.
ni ukuvuga ngo iki kinyamakuru cyavugaga ko inkike z'i Yeriko zaridutse cyangwa se zasenyutse kandi hariho n'ibifatika bigaragaza gusenyuka kwazo.
So I like to stick some of these history things in once in a while because faith is about believing what is true and history proves the Bible is true.
Kwizera kuko mbaye mvuga ngo ntabwo ari ukwizera gusa ibintu kuko kwizera ugomba kwizera ko n'ibyo wizeye hakaba hari ibifatika ushobora kubona bigaragaza ko ibyo wizeye ari byo.
Now verse 31 is a surprising verse again.
Umurongo wa 31 uratangaje.
Because it's about a prostitute who had faith.
Uraza kuvuga hejuru ya maraya wari ufite kwizera.
Most churches would not accept a prostitute that has faith, but God used a prostitute who had faith.
Amakanisa menshi ntiyapfa kwemera kwizera kwa maraya ngo bamwemerere ko babana, ariko ahangaha aravugwa.
Maybe she stopped being a prostitute, but it doesn't say that.
Wenda uwo maraya baranetse ubumaraya ariko Bibiliya ntabwize bivuga.
By faith Rahab the prostitute did not perish along with those who were your translation might say disobedient, but the Greek is apetheo, unbelieving. Okay, I'll stop there.
Use it the same way you say it. and disobedience, but
the Greek word, I'll show you if you doubt me, come after the class. The Greek word is apetheo, which means unbelieving. So Rahab believed, but the people that perished in Jericho did not believe. That was the issue, believing or not believing.
Kwizera niko kwatumye maraya uwo Rahabu atarimburwa n'abatizeye Imana, twebwe bakoresheje n'abatumviye Imana, kuko yakiranye abatasi amahoro. Nuko ikigenderewe hano nicyo cyatumye atarimburanwa n'abantu. Nuko ngo nukwizera cyangwa se kutizera, ntabwo ari ukumvira no kutumvira.
So let me read that again, translated properly. By faith Rahab the prostitute did not perish along with those who were unbelieving after she welcomed the spies in peace.
Kwizera niko kwatumye maraya Rahabu atarimburanwa n'abatizeye Imana kuko yakiranye abatasi.
Now, the ladies that are mentioned in the genealogy of Jesus, Rahab the prostitute is there, Tamar the prostitute is there. 2 of 5 ladies are prostitutes. 40% of the ladies mentioned in Jesus' genealogy were prostitutes. The church needs to answer, why does the church condemn them so badly?
Nukuvuga ngo abo Yesu yakomotsemo hari abagore 5 baza bavugwa, 5 bavugwa, nukuvuga ngo 4 muri bo bose bari bamaraya abo Yesu yakomotsemo. Idini rizadusubiza impamvu Yesu yakomotse muri abo bamaraya bangana.
What about this also? In Hebrews 11, which is explaining the whole Old Testament, why does Rahab get more attention than King David?
Kubera iki Rahab yakuriye abantu kurusha umwami Dawudi?
Okay, so verse 32 now. And what more shall I say? So the guy writing Hebrews is saying, I've given you a lot of examples. I could give a lot more, but I think this is enough. That's what the writer of Hebrews means.
Mbese mvuga iki kandi iri jambo yarakoresha niko kuba ati nongera ndavuga iki, navuze byinshi cyangwa se birandenze.
So he says, time would fail me if I tell about Gideon.
Igihe cyandenga navuze ibya Gideon.
It must mean Gideon had faith.
Bigaragara ko Gideon nawe yari afite kwizera.
Barak,
n'ibya Barak,
Samson,
na Samson,
Jephthah,
n'ibya Yephthah,
David. That's the only mention he gets here. David, his name is there, but nothing about him.
n'ibya Dawudi,
and Samuel.
n'ibya Samuel.
Okay, then verse 32. No, that's 32. Now, I've studied each one of those persons there, and if you want more information about them,
nukuvuga ngo nagiye niga kubijanye n'amazina y'aba bantu bose narivuze n'ibyo kwizera kwabo ngenda mvyiga, ubishaka wenda byimbise nabimwereka ariko twokomereza.
You can come to me after and I'll explain more. But the one in that list that I want to mention also is Samson.
Uwo shaka kugarukaho nkamuvuga muri aba narivuze ndagaruka kuri Samson.
Now, Most of the teaching I hear in the church condemns Samson, but he's listed here as the people of faith. He's not condemned. He's mentioned as an example of faith.
ni ukuvuga ngo inyigisho nyinshi numva mu makanisa abantu bigisha bakavuga kuri Samusoni ni ukuvuga ngo baza bamuciraho iteka ariko mwumve hano mu Baheburayo ukuntu bamuzanye ko mu ntwari zo kwizera.
So verse 33, after listing the names there, he says, who by faith conquered kingdoms.
Ngo kubwo kwizera yasinze abami cyangwa se
performed or did righteousness,
akora ibyo gukiranuka,
obtained promises,
ahabwa ibyasezeranijwe,
shut the mouths of lions,
bafunga iminwa y'intare.
Now let me just mention there, Samson closed the mouth of a lion, David did, Daniel did, and Paul did.
Ni ukuvuga ngo abantu babashe kuziba iminwa y'intare harimo ba Samusoni na ba Dawudi na ba Daniyeli.
By faith. By faith. Verse 34, quenched the power of fire. Who's that?
Umurongo wa 34 bakavuga ngo bashimije no kuzimya umuriro.
That's in the book of Daniel, but others as well.
Abo ni ba Daniyeli ndetse n'abandi.
Escaped the edge of the sword. They were not killed when they should have been.
Kira inkota.
From weakness were made strong.
Bakizwa n'imbaraga n'integeke.
Became mighty in war.
Baba banyembaraga mu ntambara.
Put foreign armies to flight.
Banesha ingabo z'abanyamahanga.
Verse 35, by faith women received back their dead by resurrection.
Abagore bahabwaga abo bafushije bazutse.
But now in the middle of the verse it changes.
Hano hagati birahita bihinduka.
But others. So by faith, some people had miracles done that saved them from danger, but others did not get that.
Bamwe barokotse ikota kubwo kwizera kwabo bakira ifu kubwo kwizera kwabo ariko abandi siko byagenze.
But others were tortured.
Abandi barababajwe baratishejwe.
Okay, so some of them saw miracles that delivered them from danger, but others were tortured.
Bamwe babonye ibitangaza barakira bararokoka ariko abandi barateswa barababazwa.
Who had faith? The ones that were delivered from problems or the ones that were tortured?
Ni bande bari bafite kwizera n'abatarahuye no guteswa no kubabazwa cyangwa n'ababazwa.
Who had faith?
Ni bande bari bafite kwizera?
Both did.
Again,
it's a wrong belief that if you have faith, you will have an easy life and you will not be tortured, because this says, but some of them who had faith were tortured.
Ni ukuvuga ngo ni amakosa kuvuga ngo wizeye ngo ntabwo uhura n'ibibabaje. Ni ukuvuga ngo ababizeye bamwe barababajwe abandi ntibababazwa kandi bafite bose kwizera.
Now listen to this.
Bumve kino.
Not accepting to be released so that they might obtain a better resurrection.
That is verse.
That is still in the same verse 35.
Yes. Abandi bakicishwa ikota. Hari aho yavuze ngo ntibemere kurokorwa kugira ngo bahabwe kuzuka kurushaho kuba kwiza.
So, by faith, some defeated powerful enemies and armies, but others were tortured. But they both had faith. Don't miss that.
Nukuvuga ngo bamwe kubwo kugurumana abandi bagakarokoka ibintu. Abandi bafite kwizera ariko bagateswa nyine bakababazwa.
Faith does not mean an easy life, a successful life, prosperity and prayers answered. It doesn't mean that.
Kwizera ntabwo ari ukufanyikiwa gusa, ntabwo ari ukubona ibyiza, ntabwo ari ukugira ibintu ngo byorohe.
It does mean the true God accepts me.
Ahubwo kwizera ni Imana y'ukuri.
The true God is with me.
Imana y'ukuri iri kumwe nawe.
It means the true God controls everything for our good, whether it's easy or hard.
Imana y'ukuri itegeka ibintu byose cyangwa se igenga byose byaba byoroshe byaba bikomeye.
It does mean everything that happens to the believer will end up in something good.
Cyangwa se ngo kwizera ngo wizeye ngo ibintu byose ngo bira. Kwizera nuko iherezo rya byose ibintu biba.
Faith means we can have peace in the middle of problems and torturing and persecution.
Kwizera nukugira amahoro mu gihe cyiza no mu gihe kigoye.
Faith means we know we're in the right way, whether it's easy or not.
Kwizera nukumenya ko turi mu nzira y'ukuri byaba byoroshe byaba bigoye.
Faith might mean torture.
kwizera kandi bishobora gusobanura kubabazwa.
And my wife and I are blessed to work with Muslims who have become Christians, both on the Somali side and on the Sudan side, who have been tortured, but they don't deny Jesus.
Je n'umugore waje twakoranye n'abasomali ndetse n'abasudani bafite amateka yo kuba muri Islam batotejwe cyane, ariko muri bo ntabwo baza bahakana kwizera kubera itoto.
Verse 36. And by faith others received mockings.
Abandi bakage 36 abandi bagakereshwa.
I'm just reading a little bit. By faith others were mocked. It means laughed at or shamed or
no, abandi barasekwaga cyangwa se barasekwaga.
Okay, so if you have faith, if you believe the gospel, other people might say you're stupid.
Nuzaba ufite kwizera kandi abantu rimwe na rimwe bazaba turi amuntu n'umusazi ya muntu.
They might say you're weak. Religion is a crutch that you're walking on.
Bas idini ryo rizavuga turi amuntu ni ikimuga karagendera ko kuba.
If you're a believer, they might say you're ugly.
Nimburu wizera bashobora kuba ngo umuntu mubi.
You're useless.
Uri mubi ntagaciro.
You're unloved. You're unimportant. No need for you to live. And that's what other religions say. So by faith you can get rejection. People rejecting you, throwing you away. Okay, so by faith some were saved from problems, but others got more problems because of their faith. Still in verse 36, by faith they received scourgings. This is a whip. This is a dangerous whip that can kill you. And then verse 36, yes, also chains and prison. Okay, now let me give you a few examples of the prison thing. By faith, prison. Joseph, the favorite son of Jacob, was in prison in Egypt, but God used that prison time to make Joseph save Egypt and Israel.
Mwibuke inkuru za Yosefu afungwa ukuntu Imana yamukoresheje uwari ubafunze akaza kurokoka.
Now I've been threatened with prison several times.
Nukuba ngo natewe ubwoba inshuro nyinshi ngo ndafungwa.
They were all a lie, but I've been threatened with prison and it could happen.
Kandi izo zose zari ibirego by'ibinyoma ariko bakaba ngo ndafungwa.
That's why I've studied this issue of prison a little bit.
Niyo mpamvu nagiye mfata n'umwanya wo kwiga ibintu bijanye no gufungwa kubera ko ibyo byagiye.
The Apostle Paul was in prison twice and he was killed in prison.
Nukuba ngo Paulo yafunzwe inshuro zibiri nayo yaguye.
Why didn't he just get out of prison? He was in prison because of faith, not because he lacked faith. And in Philippians 1, he writes from the prison that he is in the prison for the greater progress of the gospel. The Apostle John wrote the book of Revelation from prison. The Apostle John wrote Revelation from prison.
Now,
I want to tell you about a friend of mine. Not a close friend, but I know this guy from several meetings. And he was in prison in Khartoum. I used to live in Khartoum. He went to prison in Khartoum. He's European. Okay, he was with an organization called Voice of the Martyrs. Martyrs means people that are persecuted or killed for their faith. I knew Peter Jasek because I used to be a missionary pilot. But after I had stopped being pilot, there was a Sudanese guy, I'll say his name, Ahmed Al Khalifa, who became a Christian in our house.
no kubera ko twari tuziranye aza guhura n'umunyeshuri umwe wazaga kwiga iwacu.
Ahmed got a burden to go back to Khartoum and share the gospel there.
umunyeshuri aza kugenda muri Khartoum aja kuvuga y'ubutumwa.
He called me Dad.
Uwo yanyitaga ngo Dad.
He said, Dad, I want to go back to Khartoum and take the gospel there. I would like to start 2 businesses there to give me an opportunity to survive.
Arambwira ngo arashaka gusubira muri Sudani aje gukorayo ibintu bibiri ndebe ko nakomeza kuvuga n'ubutumwa hariya.
So I knew this Peter Jasek.
Uyu nari muzi Peter Jasek.
So I asked Peter Jasek, could your organization get some money for Ahmed to go to Khartoum so that he can do careful evangelism in the capital of the Islamic Republic of Sudan?
Za kubwira uyu muntu w'inshuti yaje w'umunyaburaya ngo bafashe uyu mwana afunzi wazaga kwiga iwacu ngo aje muri Sudan arebe ko yakomeza kuhakora ivugabutumwa ariko akabikora nyine mu bwenge.
Peter Jasek said yes, he would give some money.
Uyu Peter aza kuvuga ngo araza gutanga ayo mafaranga.
Ahmed returned to Khartoum. I sent him the money by another name because Khartoum doesn't like me.
Za kohereza uyu mwana afunzi wasubiye muri Khartoum amafaranga ariko ukoresheje iyindi nimero kuko jewe izina ryanje bari barizi nabayeyo kandi tibarisha.
So Ahmed started 2 businesses, a cyber cafe and an ordinary cafe with coffee or food.
Wa musora aza gutangira ibyashara za siberi naho yatangiraga ikawa cyangwa se kofi.
So this is a true story. I know these people. So Peter Jasek went to Khartoum to visit Ahmed and some other Sudanese Muslims who had become Christians.
Uyu watanze amafaranga aja gusura uyu wagiye mu ivugabutumwa mu Sudani agezeyo aramusanga n'abandi bari barumvise ubutumwa muri Sudani.
And Peter Jasek was arrested at the airport and put in prison.
Wa mugabo ageze
December 2015, 10 years ago now.
Imyaka 10 irashize.
You can get his book, Imprisoned with ISIS. It's about this Peter Jasek, this guy. So our son is in Khartoum, and Peter Jasek, who brought the money for his business, is arrested. And the government took his computer and phone, and they were opening them to find out who are the Muslims who became Christians.
Baza wa mugabo wafunzwe wagega kureba wa watangiye ibyashara muri Sudani ngo azakomeza ko rivuga butumwa kujya yafunzwe bafata computer ye barayimwaka barayifungura bareba abantu barabayisilamu babashije gukizwa ngo bemerwe.
So Ahmed texted me in Nairobi and said, Dad, the Muslims the friends of mine who were Muslims and became Christians, they are disappearing one by one. And I think it's because Peter Jasek's computer and phone were opened by the government. So they're finding out where are the Muslims that became Christians. And one by one, they're taking them and they disappear, probably killed.
Wanga nafunzi aza kumbwira makuru arambira ngo kubera ko uyu Peter yafunzwe wari watanze amafaranga yo gufasha uriya muntu. Kubera na computer yanje bafashe barayireba. Bantu bari abayisilamu bakaza kwemera ubutumwa bagakizwa wa mwana afunze karambi akambwira ngo hari mu kugenda hapfa umwe habura umwe hagenda habura umwe bandega bari barigishijwe bakagenda bakizwa noneho ya computer gikaberekana hakaza hagenda habura umwe.
So Ahmed texted me, Dad, I just want you to know my friends are disappearing. I might disappear too. Thank you for helping me to know the gospel and to start a business here.
Arambwira ati kubera ko inshuti zanje haya hagenda habura umwe naje nshobora kubura umwanya wari wose ariko arashimira ko wagiriye neza kumfasha kumbira.
So I said, Ahmed, if I can get you some money, I don't have money, but if I can get you some money, can you escape?
Ndamubwira ati ni kubonera amafaranga nubwo ndafite amafaranga ariko ninyabona shobora kuyakohereza wamara ugacika ukaza.
He said, I think so.
aravuga ati yego nasi.
So I found some money and I sent it to him. Again, I had to send it by secret ways and secret names because they know my name in Khartoum.
Nshaka amafaranga ndayabona, maze kuyabona ndayamwoherereza, ariko nyohereza kandi nyuze muri ya nzira akoresheje amazina yanje kuko ndikizira muri Sudani.
Sorry, I get emotional.
Pole kubera ko bihita bizanira nayo.
A week later, I get a text message from Ahmed.
Ndamwandikira,
Dad, I'm in Egypt. I'm safe. They didn't get me.
wa mwana afunze ahita anyandikira arambwira ati mu cyumweru cyari gishize nacitse ubu nyine ngeze muri Egiputa.
Peter Jasek was in prison. Ahmed escaped. Peter Jasek shared the gospel with many people in the prison in Khartoum.
Noneho wa wundi watanze amafaranga arafunzwe, karaganira ubutumwa afunzwe muri Sudani. Wa munyeshuri watangiye ishuri ririya ryo kwigisha abantu wari ufite ibyashara aracitse agiye muri Egiputa.
Eventually, Peter Jasek was released, and I think it was pressure from that the Pope. Peter Jasek wasn't a Catholic, but the Pope put pressure on the Islamic Republic of Sudan, and they finally released Peter Jasek.
Noneho wa muntu wari ufunzwe uriya ngo ni Peter aza kuvugirwa n'undi mupapa wabwiye abayisilamu, abayobozi b'abayisilamu baza kurekura.
1992, I was in Khartoum. My wife and I were in Khartoum. We lived there for 4 years before we were thrown out.
Muri 1992 twari muri Khartoum jewe n'umugore.
But in 1992, I was accused of stealing water. And in Nairobi, that's not a big thing, but in the Sahara Desert, that is a big thing. And I was accused by an army officer that I stole water from his house, which was a lie, and I was going to go to prison. His plan was to put me in prison.
Noneho jewe muri 1992 baza kunyagiriza mugani w'abarundi, baza kunshinja ko ndumwizi w'amazi zaniba amazi, ariko nshinjwe n'umuntu w'umuyobozi kugira ngo ashakishe uburyo nshobora gufungwa nzira icyo cyaha rukumvisha.
Our second son, a guy named Richard Malek, Sudanese, when he heard about it, he went to the authorities, and I was there, and he said, I work for him, so if somebody is going to prison, Richard Malek would go in my place.
Noneho umwe mu Basudani bari barumvise ubutumwa twakoranaga nabo aravuga ngo ngo we bagufunge baje kugushira muri prison, jewe ndagenda mfungwe mu cyimbo cyawe.
And he would be killed there. Most likely he'd be killed there.
Mu bishoboka cyane nuko yari no kwicwa anzira.
So this was our Sudanese son who was willing to die to save me from going to prison.
Uwo n'umwana w'Umusudani washakaga gupfa mu cyimbo cyacu kugira ngo afungwe mu mwanya wacu no gupfa, yemere gupfa ku bwacu.
But neither of us did.
Ariko muri abo twese.
So the day I was being questioned, my wife stayed home and prayed spiritual war prayers the whole day. Jesus, do not let any evil go into that building where my husband is being falsely accused.
Umugore wanje aza gufata umunsi wo gusenga, asenga amasengesho yo kurwanya imyuka yo mu kirere, asenga ngo umugabo wanje ntagende muri iriya nzu bahaba mushinja kuja kwitaba, aje gushinjwa ibintu atakoze.
So I sat in that building the whole day, and at the end of the day, the officer came to me and said, your accuser didn't come. Go home now. And if he comes back again, we'll call you. But for now, you're free. I was supposed to go to prison, but I didn't.
Noneho wari wandeze ko ngomba kuburanishwa muri iyo nzu, ndagenda nirirwa muri iyo nzu, barambwira ngo wandeze tiyabonetse, none kubera ko ataje wowe taha usubire mu rugo tuzaguhamagara nazoba yaje.
2 weeks later, the military officer accusing me died in a helicopter crash.
Noneho muri babandi barimo bandega ibyumweru 2 bishize baza gupfa mu ndege bakoze accident y'indege.
Okay, but another one of our sons named Peter Nyerere, who was the first African to ever call me dad.
Hari undi mwana wa mbere niwe wabaye wa mbere kunyita ngo dada, yitwa ngo ni Peter Nyerere.
He was arrested, he went to prison, he was tortured, he was poisoned, he died.
Nukuba nguwe yarafunzwe ahabwa isumu arafa.
Another guy, Orozo Lokine, a Sudanese guy.
Uwundi nawe yitwa iryo zina.
From the Merle tribe in South Sudan, he was in Khartoum the same time as us.
Nukuba ngo yari muri Khartoum cyo kimwe natwe icyo gihe.
He disappeared.
arabura gusa.
After about a week, I got a little piece of paper all rolled up. Somebody brought it to the office and gave it to me.
Noneho umuntu aza kuzanira udupapuro twanditseho amagambo.
It said, Dennis, this is Orozo Lokine. I'm okay. They're holding me in a ghost house.
Ubwo rwandiko rwavugaga ngo uwitwa Orozo Lokine afungiwe ahantu mu nzu y'abazimu,
which is an illegal prison. The Islamic government had this illegal prison, and they called it Ghost because the government said it's not really there, but it is really there. And Lokine wrote me a note from there to let me know he's okay.
Nukuba ngo umwana yanyandikira urwo rwandiko afungiye aho hantu bahaye iryo zina y'uko ngo inzu y'abazimu, nukuba ngo leta yemeraga ko hariho prison ariko bari barayishizeho nyine mu buryo butaha.
When Orozo disappeared, I asked Richard Malek, the same guy, I said, where do you think he is?
Baza umuntu wese uratekereza ko uyu mwana yaba yaramuriye hehe?
Richard said, I'll never forget. Richard said, there's only one animal in Khartoum that eats people.
Uwo mwana nabajije aza kumbwira ko hariho inyamaswa imwe izirya abantu muri Khartoum. Iyo nyamaswa?
The government.
Aravuga ngo ni leta.
The only animal that eats people is the government.
Inyamaswa imwe izirya abantu muri ico gihugu ni leta.
Okay, now, Orozo's note to me, he didn't say, get me out of here. He said, pray that God will use me to do evangelism in this prison.
Uyu wari ufunzwe aza kugira amahirwe yo kunyandikira arambwira ngo ntusenge kugira ngo sohoka hondi ahubwo usenge kugira ngo Imana ikoreshe hano ufungiwe kugira ngo utavuga.
Orozo was held for months. Finally, we had a prayer meeting in our house and about 15 people. We spent half of the day in prayer.
Nukuba ngo mu gihe cy'ukwezi aho twabaga duteraniye twakomezaga kumusengera.
The first hour we all prayed only for Orozo Lokine to be released.
Dusengera uyu Orozo Lokine aza kureka.
Spiritual warfare prayer against Satan, against the powers of darkness, claiming the blood of Jesus to deliver Orozo.
Santambara z'ibyuka yo mu kirere turasenga Imana ibohore amaraso ya Yesu abohore aza kurekurwa.
We spent about 5 or 6 hours in prayer. The first hour for him, the rest for others.
Nukuba ngo twafataga isaha dusengara bose abafunzwe tugafata andi masaha kangahe yo kumusengerewe.
The last prayer we said amen, and there was a knock on the door.
Igihe twasengaga amasengesho ya nyuma twumva umuntu
It was
arakoma.
my house, so I went to the door.
Hari mu rugo iwacu twumva umuntu arakoma.
Orozo Lokine.
Noneho wa musore witwa Orozo
He had been in prison for months, but this day we prayed for an hour for him to get out, and that very day he was released. I have a cousin who was put in prison in the USA. And in the prison, he learned the gospel and is now a believer. Okay, so Hebrews 11 talks about people of faith being imprisoned. And I've seen it, and I've been close to it myself several times.
Bibiliya hano mu Baheburayo kiratubwira ukuntu abizera batotejwe bababajwe bafunzwe naje narabibonye n'amaso yanje byambayeho kizikuru zose maze.
Now, one more example from real life. This is the BBC that reported this.
Kindi navuga ku rugero ko gushimangira ibyo mvuga hariho kuri za BBC.
I don't know if it's true, but the BBC reported it.
BBC niyo yabivuze sinzi nimba ari by'ukuri.
This is a direct quote. BBC said, credible research has reached the shocking conclusion that every year an estimate of more than 100,000 Christians are killed because of some relation to their faith.
Nukuvuga ngo iki kinyamakuru cya BBC cyavuze ko nk'uko mu mwaka buri mwaka hapfa abakristo bagera k'ibihumbi 100 bapfa bazira kwizera kwabo cyangwa se ibyo bizera.
Okay, verse 37, they were stoned, they were sawn in two, they were put to death with the sword, they went about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, ill-treated.
Bicishwaga amabuye bagakerezwa ikerezo, bakageragezwa, bakicishwa ikota, bakazerera bambaye impu z'intama n'iz'ihene.
Now we just have 3 verses. We're almost to finish.
Dusigaje 30 nitumara dusoma.
Verse 38. After giving the list of these people who were tortured or killed, verse 38 says, men of whom
bamaze kuvuga aba bantu bose bagiye bateswa kubera kwizera kwabo,
the world was not worthy.
umurongo wa 38 ukavuga ngo yemwe n'isi ntiyari ikwiriye ko bayibamo.
This is saying, God says the people who were tortured for their faith are more important and more honor and more valuable and glorious than the whole world.
Nukuvuga ngo ku Mana abantu batotezwa bazira kwizera kwabo, Imana ikabubaha, ikabaha agaciro gusumba ibindi bintu zose byo mu isi.
Then 38 continues, wandering in the deserts and mountains and caves and holes in the ground. That's the kind of life that some believers have to live.
Bazereraga mu mashamba no mu bihanamanga no mu mavumo, ibigibi niko abizera uko babayeho muri no si bagenda bakubita hirya no.
Now verse 39 is another key verse. And all of these, having gained approval through their faith, did not receive what was promised.
Abo bose nubwo bamaze guhamwa neza kubwo kwizera kwabo, nyamara ati bahabwa ibyasezerano.
So, the 2 most important verses we've seen today probably are Hebrews 11:13 and 39. Which means faith does not mean you get an easy life on earth. The approval, God accepted them through their faith, but did not receive what was promised. Why? Verse 40. Because God had provided, the Greek word is to look ahead, to see in the future. God had provided something better for us believers now.
Kuko Imana yatugambiriye ikirushaho kuba ciza turi kumwe ndetse n'abizera,
so that apart from us, the right now believers, they, the older ones, would not be made perfect.
Kugira ngo badatunganywa bose tutari kumwe.
Okay, I don't know exactly what that means. Made perfect, it means get everything. Probably it means eternity in heaven. So that the other people did not get the easy life until all of us together might refer to the rapture or the new heaven and the new earth.
Aba bose bari batarahabwa ibyasezeranijwe batazagororerwa tutari kumwe, wenda baba bategereje n'igihe cyo kuzamurwa kw'itorero n'abizera bose bakazagororerwa bari hamwe.
So, how does anybody that ever goes to heaven, how do they get there?
Umuntu uja mu ijuru ni gute ajayo?
By faith.
Kwizera.
Nobody goes to heaven by being good or by obedience. Everybody, that's what Hebrews 11 is saying. 40 verses are saying it is faith only that will enable or allow God to accept us and take us to a better country, heaven. Okay.